Welcome back to All This Math. This is Professor Parker. If you're here, hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. At the end of this video, please share this with at least one other person. And if you have any questions on anything I try to explain, make sure you put your question in the comments. All right. Now, what are we doing here today? We're doing some business math. We're doing a problem dealing with simple interest. Yeah, let's underline that. Simple interest. Simple interest. All right. Now, simple interest as compared to or contrasted with compound interest. If you're making an investment, compound interest is what you want because your money's going to grow faster and it's going to grow more than with simple interest. Let's talk about the difference between simple interest and compound interest. Simple interest is when you get a certain amount of interest every year and it's the same amount of interest every year. So let's say you do the calculations like we about to do in this problem, and your amount of interest, your annual interest amount or interest income is like $100, right? So if you got it, if you have invested money and the length of your investment is like 10 years, you're gonna get that same $100 every year for 10 years. You're gonna make $1,000. That's cool. But if you had the option to do compound interest, to do a deal that involves that uses compound interest, that's what you want. Because with compound interest, the original principal that you start out with, plus the interest you earned after the first year, then they take the percentage of that. So they're taking a percentage of a greater amount of money. So that means that every year your interest income is going to grow. Now, notice what I said. With compound interest, your interest income is going to grow every year. Just like people grow every year, babies grow every year, they grow up. You know what I'm saying? You have a baby. Next thing you know, 20 years later, you got a whole adult child. You know what I'm saying? Right? So, but with simple interest, you get that same amount of interest every year. The amount of interest is not going to change. Of course, the amount of interest you have altogether is going to grow, but you're getting the same $100 the first year, $100 the second year, $100 the third year, $100 the fourth year, another $100 the fifth year, and so on and so forth until throughout the length of the investment. But with compound interest, it might go like this. You might get $100 the first year, you might get $102 the second year, you might get $106 the third year. You might get $112 the fourth year. Fifth year, you might get $125, right? You see how it's growing? And you might be looking at that saying, well, that's just a little bit of money, but it's going to grow, right? It's going to grow. And when it comes to investments, you need every penny you can get, right? So, you know what I'm saying? Like with compound interest, your interest amount grows every year. It changes every year. It gets bigger every year. That's the difference between compound interest and simple interest. Simple interest is simple. It's like once you calculate what the interest is going to be based on the original investment, you're getting that same amount of money every year. The math is simple. All right. Now let's read this question. It says, how much simple interest is earned on a $4,000 investment at 6% for 5 years? $4,000 investment. So first of all, since we're talking about simple interest, let's write down the formula for simple interest. There's a formula to this, just like there's a formula for compound interest. There's a formula for simple interest. It looks like this. So usually we use a capital I to represent interest income. Put an equal sign, capital P, RT. Now you need to know what all these letters stand for. We're about to do some algebra, right? This is a formula. All right. So this is why algebra is important. All the people that talk like all I need to know how to do is count my money. All right, you trying to get to the money and everything, then you need to know algebra. You need to know algebra. You do. So you can calculate and forecast and figure out how much you can expect to get, right? So I stands for interest. That's what we're going to figure out. P stands for principal. Principal is the original amount of money you put up. Like let's say you're trying to flip some money. How much money you putting up in the first place? That's your principal, right? That's your principal. Principal is the money that you try to flip, right? Somebody get their income tax back. Might get 5,000, 10,000, 6,000, whatever. That's your principal. You try to flip that into some type of investment. All right. That's your principal, right? The money you start out with, capital P, principal. R, what does R stand for? R stands for your interest rate. The rate, not the amount of interest, but the rate. In this case, it says at 6%. That 6% is your interest rate, right? That's like basically the cost of money, right? That's how much money costs. So yeah, money has a price. That might sound strange to you, but money itself has a price, and the price is the interest rate, right? Because dig it. Like let's say this was like, I don't know, this might be a bank. You might have made an investment. You might have made a deposit in a bank. You might have bought a CD, a certificate of deposit at some bank or whatever, right? You could have spent that money, right? But when you give the money to the bank or you invest the money in the bank, you're actually giving them a loan, right? And because you're giving them a loan, you're doing something for them, they got to do something for you. So they paying you to use your money. They're going to pay you 6%, which is 6% of that amount. So this is why we got to understand percentages. Percentages is part of the language of math, and percentages is part of the language of money and finance. If you don't understand percentages, then you won't be able to communicate when it comes to money, when it comes to finance, when it comes to investing, when it comes to earning, when it comes to spending. You won't be able to communicate. I mean, even if you just go in the store and something is on sale, 10% off, 20% off, 15% off, you need to know what that means. You need to know what that means, like real talk. You need to know what that means. And it's not that difficult to understand. I got plenty of videos on this channel. Go to the percentage calculation problem playlist. I got plenty of other videos about percentages on this channel. All right. I want for people to understand percentages. Because when you go shopping, you need to understand if something is on sale or if there's an extra added cost of something or if there's tax. It's all communicated to us in the form of percentages. So we need to understand percentages. It ain't cool to not know that. It ain't cool to be, unaware. It ain't cool to be ignorant. I know a lot of people try to make it cool, right? Because they don't know how to do stuff. So they're like, well, I don't want to feel bad. So we might as well just make it seem cool. No, it's not cool. It's not. Just learn it for real. All right. So look, principal is how much you start out with. That's your 4,000. R is your interest rate. That's your 6%. T stands for time. T stands for time, the amount of time in years. In this particular problem, the amount of time is 5 years. All right. So all we got to do, and like these problems are relatively easy compared to like some of the other problems, right? Because all you got to do is basically plug in numbers and then do the multiplication. All right. Now this means P times R times T. Again, math language, algebra language. You got to know the language of algebra. You got to know this means PRT means P times R times T. So when you replace the letters with numbers, that means you're multiplying this number times this number times this number. So let's do it. So let's replace P with 4,000 because that's the original amount. That's the money you try and flip. So you start up with 4,000, right? Then you're going to replace that. You're going to replace the R with interest rate. Now, interest rate is 6%. Now, you can't just put a 6 right there because you got to convert the percentage to decimal form. You got to convert the percentage to decimal form. So write that down in your notes and don't ever forget that. So how do you do that though? Whenever you want to convert a percentage to a decimal form, you got to take the number in a percentage, which is 6, divided by 100. That's the process. Divided by 100. Why you divide it by 100? Because a percentage is just a fraction with a denominator of 100. That's really all a percentage is. And when you divide, if you set up a fraction 6 over 100, that means division. That means 6 divided by 100. That's what a fraction means. That's another way to represent a fraction. A fraction is a division problem. It's a straightforward division problem. That's all a fraction really is. You divide the top number by the bottom number. That's how you get a decimal. So 6 divided by 100 is going to be 0.06. How do I know that? Because whenever you divide something by 100, all you really doing is taking a decimal point and moving it over 2 spaces. Now, somebody might look at this and say, but I don't see no decimal point. You're right. It's not written. What's understood don't need to be said. What's understood don't need to be written. We understand in the language of mathematics, right? Because math is a language. You got to know how to read it, speak it, and write it. Read it, speak it, and write it. You got to know that. You got to know there's an invisible decimal point after the 6 right here. So you move that invisible decimal point 1 space, it will be 0.6, 2 spaces. Ain't no number here though, right? Another thing you got to know, you got to use placeholders. The number 0 is a placeholder. So it's going to be 0.06. 0.06. That's why it's 0.06. All right. Now, T stands for time. The time is 5 years. So you're going to multiply that. And notice how I'm using parentheses to show separation and to show multiplication. When you got parentheses next to each other, that means you're multiplying. Or parentheses next to a number, that means you're multiplying. All right. Now, let's do this. Let's say, all right, 4,000 times 0.06. Now, we can do this with a calculator very easily. Multiply straight through. Or, let me see something. Let me see if I can do this mentally. Now, 4,000 times 0.06. So let me imagine this was a 6. Let me imagine it was a 6. And I would do 4,000 times 6. 4,000 times 6 would be 24,000. $4,000 6 times, or $4,000, you made $4,000 6 times. That's 24 racks, right? 24,000, right? But because the decimal point is 2 spaces to the left of the 6, instead of it being 24,000, because this is 24,000, but I didn't account for the decimal point being 2 spaces to the left. So now I got to, this is the invisible decimal point out here. Move it 2 spaces over. That would be 240, 240.00, 240. All right. So that's going to be 240. And then bring down the 5. Where did 240 come from? 4,000 times 0.06. If you throw this in the calculator, I guarantee you it's going to be 240. All right. Now, 240 times 5. Let me show you a trick. Again, you could use a calculator, but sometimes you don't need a calculator. You don't got to always rely on the calculator, right? You could do mental math. Our brain is a calculator. Your brain is a calculator already. So you could do 200 times 5, right? And this is called the distributive property. Basically, break this 240 down into 200 plus 40, 200 plus 40, 200 plus 40. Do the 200 times 5, that gives you 1,000. 200 times 5 is 1,000. Just like 2 times 5 is 10. 20 times 5 is 100. 200 times 5 is 1,000. All right. Then 40 times 5 is 200. So you do the 1,000 plus the 200. That's going to give you 1,200. $1,200. So that means that after 5 years, you take 4,000, right? Invest it at a 6% interest rate. After 5 years, you're going to have $1,200 because every year you're getting 240. Every year you're getting the same 240. That's why it's simple interest, like I told you. Every year you get the same 240, same $240, right? If it was compound interest, there'd be a different formula and the numbers would grow. Like first year you might have 240. Next year you might have 250. Next year you might have 265. Next year you might have 285, 290, something like that. And it keeps growing and growing and growing. It might not grow that fast, but I was just making numbers up. But with compound interest, every year your interest grows. Whereas with simple interest, you get this, you're gonna get the same 240 year one. I got, like, let's say you made the investment on January 1st, December 31st, they're gonna hit your account with $240. Next year, December 31st, $240. Next year, December 31st, $240. So just make sure you know how to, you memorize this formula for simple interest. You know how to do the calculation. You know how to multiply, right? You could use a calculator, but my suggestion to you, anybody watching this, is to practice using your brain to do mental math, to do multiplication, to do division, addition, subtraction, whenever, especially this part right here, how we broke the 240 down into 240, 200 over here, 40 over here. Multiply each of those numbers by 5. That's called the distributive property. That's the technical term for that, distributive property, because we basically distributed the 5 to each of those two numbers. We giving the 5 to the 200, we giving the 5 to the 40. Giving the 5 to the 200, that's how we get 1,000. Get a 5 to the 40, that's how we get 200. 1,000 plus 200 is that right there. So at the 5 years, you earn 1,200 in interest. Now, another question you might see with a problem like this is, what's the value of the investment after 5 years? Notice they didn't say that. They said, what's the interest? The interest is 1,200. But remember, you put up 4,000 from the rip. So since you put up 4,000 from the rip, you would add the 4,000 with the 1,200, and that would be 5,200. So that would be the value of the investment. So at the 5 years, you turn 4,000 into 5,200. That's good money. That's good money. It's growing. Plus, you got to deal with inflation. You got to keep up with inflation because every year the value of money goes down. So if you just let it sit, right, under the mattress or in a Nike shoebox or something like that, you're losing value. You're losing money because you're losing value because the value is going down. All right. So keep that in mind. Practice problems like this, dealing with simple interest, calculating simple interest. Make sure you hit the like button on this video. Make sure you subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Share this video with somebody. But if you had any questions about anything that I explained, please put your question in the comments and I'll get at you. I might make a follow-up video just for you based on your question. All right. Peace.